Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another Calm COVID Convo. I'm sure we'd all prefer not to be talking about COVID whatsoever, but it's back and we're back. Well, we've got different parts of the country, obviously big parts of the country in lockdown. So we needed to get Calm COVID Convos back to talk about the support and the packages out there to help our business owners as much as we possibly can. Joining me today, of course, is Rebecca Mihalic, Director of Business Depot Sydney. Rebecca, first up, how are you going into your fourth week of lockdown? How are you and your family and your team?
We're all healthy, so that's the main thing, I suppose. Going a little bit crazy. I could do with a night out, I imagine, like everybody else, or even just a long drive somewhere away from my house. Yeah, I've got my COVID hair back as well, so curly.
The curls are back.
Well. Yeah.
Because it was only a month or so ago that I know I put a video out there talking about the optimism and the energy within the economy and so forth. And I generally still think there is an optimism and energy in the economy, but there is undoubtedly not a great feeling, I dare say, down in Sydney in particular, and Melbourne, which is in lockdown now as well. I think Adelaide's going into lockdown again as well. Obviously, that's going to have an impact on that energy. And even up here in Queensland, we're feeling the anxiety for everybody else, and we're feeling sympathetic, obviously, for those down south. But there's an anxiety feeling around what's the impact of this on the economy and on business overall. How would you describe the feeling down there at the moment?
I think particularly after Saturday's announcements, we've shut down a lot more of our economy than we've ever had in New South Wales. There's a lot of anxious people out there. A lot more people ended up out of work as of Monday, effectively, than we'd really ever experienced. And then even today's announcements, our Premier seemed to backpedal a little bit on this assertion that we would open up at least construction definitely on the 31st of July. Now she seems unwilling to commit to that date. So I think it's just uncertainty that's making people anxious.
And that's a big extra part of the lockdown, isn't it? Closing down construction, that's a big part of any economy. So I imagine that's created a huge amount of stress down there with your clients. So today we want to talk about the support that's available from the New South Wales government and from the federal government. So the federal government stuff will be relevant for anyone else in lockdown once they get past the third week of lockdown. But we're going to focus mainly today on New South Wales and particularly that situation. We will introduce you to the latest word from the government, which is the Job Saver package instead of the Job Keeper package. And I'm actually going to try and draw some comparisons between Job Keeper and Job Saver because it is a whole new system, a whole new package that has some things that are the same, but not many. So let's get right into it. And if anybody does have any questions, please use the Q&A button down the bottom on your screen. Works best if you can log your question on there and I'll get to it throughout the conversation. Otherwise, we'll take some more questions at the end as well. So there's a few key parts to the different packages, Rebecca, and the first one is the New South Wales Business Grant. Tell us about the business grant, how much it is, what we need to qualify for that.
The business grant actually has three different amounts and it's all based on a turn down in your business. So if you've had a 30% decline, it's in revenue, you get $7,500. If it's a 50% decline, the amount's $10,500. And if you've had a 70% decline, it's a $15,000 grant. And these are just one-off payments. So it's not every week or fortnight, it's just one lump sum.
And so just to repeat that for people and anyone who wants to refer, we do have a copy of all this information on the blog on our website. So we've got a 30% for $7,500, 50% decline for $10,500, and 70% decline for $15,000. Now, is that just a once-off payment, Rebecca?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And what else do I need to be eligible for that?
So the decline is not as straightforward as you would expect. The decline is actually calculated on 2-week operating period between the 26th of June to the 17th of July compared to the same period in 2019. So they've picked 2019 because it's well before COVID hit our shores and should be relative to normal trading terms.
So unlike the JobKeeper sort of scenario, we have a 2-week period that we're comparing to, and we're allowed to compare it to 2019. What if the business didn't exist in 2019?
So to be eligible for the grants, the businesses actually only had to exist as of 1st of June 2021. So if your business didn't operate in 2019, when trying to calculate out that decline, you have to really use common sense. There's not clear rules. It just says use an alternative period. So when we've been looking at them this week, we're either looking at 2020, if that was a decent comparison, or really the highest trading fortnight since the business has operated to see what the decline is looking like. We'll submit that information to Revenue New South Wales, and then they will decide whether or not they're okay with that comparison, and it will be a manual approach to assessing your eligibility for the claim in that instance.
So I think you've actually just answered there one of the questions we've already got on the Q&A from Chris, where he asked, what if your business is new or only trading less than 6 months? So there's no like alternate tests like JobKeeper had. So you're just saying common sense and make the submission.
Yeah.
Okay. What are the other eligibility requirements?
So for this first grant that's been open and currently the only business related one that's available at the moment, your annual turnover for your business has to be more than 75,000, and you have to have an annual payroll of less than $10 million. And that's at a group level.
And I assume you need to have some employees, Rebecca, given it's about job saving. What if they don't have any employees?
You can still apply even if you don't have any employees. If you don't have any employees and your turnover is below 75,000, though, there will be a whole other grant for you that's opening later.
Okay, so Kiki, I think that's probably answered part of your question there around the business grant and the need for PAYG employees to be eligible. There's always complications around timing of income when you're drawing a comparison between one period and another. And I recall with JobKeeper, we could choose either cash or accrual to assess it at different points in time. What's the situation with the New South Wales Business Grant?
With the grant, when you're having a look at your actual decline in turnover, they've used the same rules as when we did JobKeeper. And this is about the only comparison between the two that is the same. So it's the GST turnover. So that's based on how you currently report your GST to the ATO on your BAS, is how you decide if the comparison is on cash or accruals basis.
Okay. So if I lodge my BAS on an accruals basis, I should assess it on an accruals basis. If I lodge my BAS on a cash basis, I should assess it on a cash basis.
Correct.
Okay, good. One of the other things that came up a lot when we talked about JobKeeper was groups that had multiple entities within them. Maybe we've got a service entity that actually charges an amount to a related company or something or other. Are there rules around how to assess it in that situation?
Yeah, particularly if you're using a service trust. So if you have a trust and your trust is going to apply for this grant, you will actually have to be able to prove that that trust's income is independent of another related entity, so that it's deriving income itself from third parties and its actual income has declined, as opposed to situations where we sometimes see a company with a service trust attached. They don't want to see that company that is operated by you stop paying the service trust just for the sake of getting this grant. They won't allow that.
So they'll look through sort of group transactions. If that service trust does provide services externally, if that trust provides services externally, it can get the grant as well as another entity if there's two different ABNs? Absolutely.
Each ABN is eligible for the grant. If you operate multiple businesses under the one ABN, though, you will only be eligible for the grant once. It's a per ABN style.
Okay, so once-off payments, when can we start to see the money flow from the New South Wales government?
The word on the website is there will be 5 days after successful application. So we are having problems like getting applications through. A lot of our clients are going on and the website's been down most of the last 3 days. So if you can get it lodged and you put in all the paperwork and a correct lodgement, you should have the money in your bank account within 5 days.
For big businesses, though, it's going to be pretty hard to get too excited about this, would you say, Rebecca? I mean, if I've got payroll of $5 million and all I'm going to get, even if I've had a 70% decline, all I'm going to get is a $15,000 grant. Am I being harsh there?
It is hard to get excited about it, dependent on the size of your business expenses, but it's also a lifesaver for a lot of small businesses who absolutely need this money.
Okay, so let's say I meet the requirements, how do I apply?
The application is actually going to be self-driven by you as the business owner. So you need to make sure you have a Service New South Wales account. And if you've done any Dine and Discover registrations for your business or got on there and downloaded some information for being COVID safe and got the codes, you should already have an account, and you use that account to lodge your application. You'll need some information from us to do that, but we can go through that as well.
Okay. And where does the headcount part of things come in, Rebecca? Is that one of the eligibility requirements, or is it something we have to report on?
So yeah, it's an eligibility requirement. So to be eligible for this grant, and it looks like the following grants that are going to come after this, you have to maintain the same number of staff that you had on the 13th of July through this period. Now, that's not the amount that you pay them. It's just the same number of people. So it's very clearly head count on that. And there is a little bit of an exemption around it if the employee resigns and that's out of your control. That's allowable, but you are not allowed to actively reduce your headcount during this period.
And now I see on our blog, there's mention in there of needing your 2020 business income tax return or notice of assessment as part of the application process. I know many people are behind in their affairs. What if they haven't done their 2020 tax returns yet?
If it's still not done, other than getting on top of it and getting it done as soon as possible, you can also lodge your BASs in the meantime as evidence, but be prepared. Anything that doesn't sort of go in with exactly what they asked for, they will potentially go through a manual review and you'll be contacted to supply additional information. So just try and get ready in the background.
So I think you said to me earlier, Rebecca, when we were talking about this, you said that if any of those ones going for that 70% decline to get that $15,000 amount, is there any extra reporting requirements or information that they're needing?
Yeah, so one of the key things that you need to supply is actually a letter from your accountant, and that letter needs to effectively have us as your accountant sign off on that drop in revenue. That's the evidence required. So if you are not on the impacted list, which is a specific list of services that have been shut down completely since the beginning of lockdown, so like your cafes and gyms and things like that, or if you are going for the full 15,000, then you have to have a letter from us.
Okay. We've got a few questions here already, Rebecca. So before we move on to one of the other packages, I might answer these questions specific to the business grant if we can. Those that we can't answer, we'll look into and we'll get back to you later if we can just get your details. First question here from Kiki. And what about businesses that have no official employees but directors that take drawings?
You're still eligible for the grant, and depending on your turnover will depend which one you're eligible for. However, if you have gone and applied for the COVID disaster payment, which we'll get to, you will not be eligible. That will make you ineligible. So you just have to check what you've already applied for.
So as a sole trader, essentially, you can get this business grant as long as you've got the decline in turnover.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We've got another question here. Does not-for-profits have to include donations in their turnover definition as it included in JobKeeper?
Yes.
It does. Nothing's changed there. Okay. Yvonne's got a question that's popped up on the chat. Do we need an accountant's letter for the $7,500 grant?
You don't need one if you're able to supply enough evidence and if you're on the list of industries that have been highly impacted. Otherwise, you will need a letter.
Okay. What if my business is not located in Sydney, but maybe Wagga Wagga or somewhere else in New South Wales? Are they eligible as well if they show that drop in turnover?
Yeah, if you're showing the drop in turnover, you're still eligible. However, it does also ask, so further to that, if your business is registered outside of New South Wales, but you operate a business in New South Wales, you actually have to supply an additional piece of evidence, like a rates notice or a lease agreement that shows that you actually operate here.
Okay, so yeah, do you have to actually be operating in an area that's been locked down?
In New South Wales, generally.
Okay. So anywhere in New South Wales. So if I'm in Wagga Wagga and I don't have any staff and I don't provide any services to Sydney, but I've got a 30% decline, can I be eligible?
The smaller grant, yes.
Just for the smaller grant, okay.
And then given that, you might actually want to consider some of the other grants instead, but we can get there.
We'll get to that shortly. Brad and Lisa have got a question, a business grant question. Now, this is right up your alley because it's about a builder. So as a builder who receives progress payments, our income is not consistent or regular. If we received a progress payment in between the dates stipulated, would you not qualify yet? We are unable to operate for 2 weeks due to the lockdown. Is there any exceptions for the building industry?
Specifically for the construction industry, the chances are that you're not going to be eligible for the grants that are currently available unless you can show that decline for the last couple of weeks. However, the next grant actually kicks in from the date that they announced the construction lockdown. So the Job Saver is supposed to kick in on the 18th of July, which will be more relevant to you, Brad and Lisa.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll talk about that when we get to the next one. That's more relevant for the builders and so forth. Mike has a question. Can you advise as to when those who have turnover of less than 70,000? Oh, we'll get to that one in a second. That's a separate set of rules that we have there. A quick question in regards to the Service New South Wales grant. Can an internal employee who are qualified accountant within the business, are they able to verify and sign the decline in turnover letter?
So long as they can supply the details about their qualification on the sign-off letter, then yes.
Okay, good. And Kiki, you got another question on there, but I'll come back to that one if you don't mind after I cover off on some of these next items. So let's move on to the next one. The next package is the micro business support grant. So this is the same as the other one, or the same basis sort of grant as the other one, but it's for those businesses with less than $75,000 turnover. Rebecca, tell us about what other eligibility requirements, how much can we get?
So the micro business was actually supposed to open for applications on Monday, and for whatever reason the state government decided to not open it, probably because their systems were already struggling. So I'm not sure when that will actually open. It just says the end of July at this stage. The payments that you'll be receiving will be $1,500 a fortnight, so about $750 a week. And to be eligible, it's for businesses between 30,000 and 75,000, and you have to just have a 30% decline in revenue. And they haven't released the full rules, but I imagine it's going to be the same as the other business grant. So that 2-week comparison between this year and 2 years ago.
Okay, so that's businesses between $30,000 and $75,000 turnover. So it's the real micro sort of contractor sort of style businesses, isn't it?
That's right. And if you have an even smaller business and your turnover is below 30,000 at this stage, they haven't actually released anything.
Okay, so that might be one of the other items we talk about, which might be the disaster payment.
Correct.
Okay, we'll get to that shortly. Our next is the big federal government package that they announced. So this is the Job Saver scheme. We're going to run out of words to add to job sooner or later, but so this is jointly funded, I understand, by the New South Wales government and the federal government. Now, this one only kicks in from the 4th week of the lockdown. So those grants effectively represent the first 3 weeks.
Yes.
And the Job Saver scheme now comes into play. Tell us about the Job Saver scheme. How's it going to work?
So specifically for New South Wales, the Job Saver scheme kicks in on the 18th of July. It's a combined state and federal grant, so it's half funded by the federal government but administered by your different state governments. So if there's anyone on the call for Victoria, you will eventually be eligible for Job Saver as well, but you need to wait a couple of weeks, unfortunately.
Let's hope they're not in lockdown for 4 weeks, though.
That's right. I wouldn't want anyone to have to go through what we're going through at the moment. So the grant will cover 40% of a business's weekly payroll if they're eligible, and the eligibility is looking at a 30% decline in revenue, and your business has to have a turnover between 75,000 and 50 million. So this is another one that those micro businesses are not going to be eligible for, but it's not very common that a business with less than $75,000 in revenue has employees, and this one's specifically to help you cover those wage costs in your business.
So this one seems to have some similarities to JobKeeper in that it's requiring that 30% decline in turnover. You said it was 40% of weekly payroll. There's some caps on that though, isn't there?
Yeah, the minimum payment you'll get is $1,500 a week, and the upper end is $10,000 per week per organisation or ABN. However, given the change, and I probably shouldn't say this, but given the changes that occurred in New South Wales and how quickly they're changing these amounts, they had increased the amounts on the other grant recently, and I'm sure that, well, I have a feeling that these will be increased as well.
You're thinking that these amounts will increase, the per week sort of amount.
That's right. These were the original amounts that were talked about before they started increasing the other grants.
Yeah, okay. So,
so keep an eye out.
Yeah, so if our business grants were 7.5, 10.5, and 15 for the first 3 weeks, we then have a maximum of $10,000 per week per organisation again.
Yeah.
So if I've got multiple businesses that provide services externally, I could potentially get this in both entities.
Absolutely.
Yep, good. Okay, so it's not as exciting as JobKeeper in that it's not endless depending on the number of employees that you have. But 40% of payroll, minimum payment of $1,500, maximum payment of $10,000 per week per organisation. I understand it's a special rule if it's a business that doesn't have employees.
Yeah, so if you are a sole trader or potentially an eligible trust that just pays out trust distributions, you're still eligible for this as long as your income is above $75,000. But the amount that you will receive will be much different. It's $1,000 a week.
So given this one's only really just started to be relevant from the 18th, we can't actually apply for this yet, can we?
No, so the application for this doesn't open until the end of July, but they haven't given a firm date. And based off what's happened with the other one, we would then assume payments would start in August. Now, the tricky part about that, though, is this has the exact same rule and the same date around headcount. So if you think you could potentially be eligible, and if there is a possibility the payment amounts will change, you have to still maintain your headcount. It does make it very difficult for businesses to make real decisions without knowing exactly what's happening.
So we don't even know when we're going to be able to apply. We don't even know when we're going to be able to get payment. But one of the requirements is you need to maintain your headcount.
Yes, as of last Friday.
As of last Friday. So if this is going to be support for you, you're probably not going to want to go out there and just sack everybody. But can you stand them down? Are they still considered employees for your headcount?
Yeah, so if you stand down your employees, you still have an employment arrangement with them. So they're still counted for that headcount purpose. However, if you are going to stand down employees, make sure that you do it in the right way and get the right advice around that.
Yeah, I think there's some guidelines on the Fair Work website and so forth around that pandemic leave or standing down and that type of thing. We've got some questions, Rebecca. I'm loading you up today. Chris has asked, will they back pay from week 1 of lockdown, the 40%?
No, they will not. It's only supposed to kick in from week 4. And then that other grant, it's what's supposed to cover you from week 1 to week 3.
Can you get the grant and the job saver? I think I know the answer to that one. I think yes, because the grant is relevant for the first 3 weeks and the job saver is relevant from the 4th week onwards.
Correct.
Did I get it right?
You did.
Luke's got a question. What if we've already let someone go? Can I hire another person to get the headcount back up?
Ideally before you run payroll again.
Yeah. And do you think the government will be looking at single touch payroll sort of data again to sort of apply some of this?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And remembering it's headcount. So if there is a circumstance where you absolutely have to let somebody go, it doesn't say that it needs to be the same person. It just needs to be the same number of people.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not ticking off exactly the same people, but it's just the number.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a question here. Where a director is an employee of a company, can they apply for both the disaster payment? I might come back to that one actually when we talk about the disaster payment, sorry. I have 3 staff in New South Wales and 3 staff in Queensland, but all our work is in New South Wales. Can I apply for my Queensland team too, who are working on New South Wales events?
For the job saver application, I don't have a definitive answer for that yet because all the rules haven't been released. But because you have a New South Wales operation, you would be able to qualify for the full level of the grant dependent on your turn down.
So as far as you're concerned, to have a New South Wales operation, it doesn't need to be a New South Wales incorporated entity or New South Wales address, I assume.
You need to have evidence that you have an operation in New South Wales.
So it can't be a Queensland business who's sending their employees down to New South Wales?
No, not unless you're actually running an operation down here. So if you're in Queensland but you have a premises that you rent or something that you're using for the business, then yes, that's a New South Wales operation.
Okay. Let's then go on to the fourth part of the support packages that are available, and that's the disaster payment. So I understand this is a federal government one as well, Rebecca?
Yes.
And so tell us about the disaster. I know there were some changes in the amounts recently with the disaster payment.
So the disaster payment is a federal grant for employees only. So you need to be an employee who's lost work, and you apply for it yourself via MyGov. So most of us now have our MyGov account set up, and that's where you would get the payment from. Now, with the payment amounts, it's changed. So it started off at $325 a week if you lost less than 20 hours, or if you lost more than 20 hours work, it's $500 a week. For New South Wales, that's changed since week 3 of the lockdown, and it's now $375 if you lost between 8 to 20 hours of work, $375 if you lost a full day, or $600 if you've lost more than 20 hours.
So correct me if I'm wrong, that it's an individual focused one.
Yeah, correct. And those payment amounts that I just went through, particularly the increased ones, are for New South Wales at this stage only. Every state, although it's administered by the federal government, every state has then different requirements. So if you are in Victoria or SA and you're about to go into lockdown, these things will happen. If you go on the website, you'll be able to have a look at what you're eligible for, and we'll release some more information about that as it comes through.
Okay, so to be eligible, you need to be impacted by what they've called a restricted order movement, which is a lockdown, isn't it?
Effectively, yeah.
Okay. I know there was some talk about maybe employees having to take annual leave or using up personal leave and so forth before they can be eligible for the disaster payment. What's the story with that?
So that's been a misconception that's gone around, because when you go through the application, it asks you whether or not you have any appropriate leave. However, appropriate leave is really quite specific to this scenario, where it's only pandemic leave or leave a state-based leave for disaster payments, which most employees are actually not currently eligible anyway, because to only get those payments, you have to have COVID or be taking care of someone with COVID. So if you have annual leave, unpaid leave, sick leave, carers leave, long service leave, any of those leave entitlements, you don't need to be using them to get your $600 disaster payment.
Okay. And so if I'm a sole trader that operates my business in my personal name, can I get both the disaster payment and the job saver and the grant?
No, if you are a sole trader and you get the disaster payment, you will not be eligible for the other grants.
Okay. But you will be eligible for the business grant and the job saver, because they're for different periods anyway.
That's right. But, and although the disaster grant is less money, if you need it now, it might be worthwhile looking at, because it will be a while until you get the other payments, whereas you can get the $600 immediately. And if we're looking at the New South Wales business grant specifically, like that micro grant at only $1,500, there's not a huge difference between $600 and $750 a week. So you might want to just get a move on the money instead.
Okay. I want to go back to a couple of these other questions. So where a director is an employee of a company, can they apply for both the disaster payment, which I assume is from there individually, and the state business grant?
My understanding is yes, based on the rules, because you are applying for the grant as an employee, and the state-based grants are actually not necessarily, particularly that first one, are actually not necessarily designed to just cover wages. It's for any business expense. So as an employee of your business, just because you've gone and gotten a separate disaster payment doesn't mean that you stop having to pay rent or any of the other eligible expenses. So you should still be able to claim for both. There's nothing at this point that says that you can't in that instance.
Okay. But obviously the business grant is specifically for an entity with an ABN.
Yes.
And the disaster one is for an individual.
Yes.
Okay, good. If you work for different companies and your hours have been reduced from both companies, can you claim for both reductions?
Yeah, but you're still only going to get one payment.
Yes, you still only get one disaster payment, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are workers on working visas able to get assistance? Do you know?
I actually don't know. Previously, the answer to that has been no, and that's going to be my gut reaction, but we can check.
Yeah. Just reach out to us separately if you like, and we can follow that up for you. Mike's got a question. My understanding is that the micro grant applications will not open until the 26th of July. However, is this grant available to those who were not impacted until after the announcement made on the 17th, where they shut down the construction industry?
So the dates for the micro grant are currently all the way up to the 26th of July. That hasn't actually changed. So your eligibility period is different to the small business grant. Although in saying that, the small business grant did used to have the dates to 26th of July and they changed. The micro grant has not changed yet, and I don't think it's going to. But if it does, we'll let you know.
Okay. But obviously the construction industry is only just getting eligible for JobSaver now.
Yes.
From the closure of that industry on the 18th.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, good. Kiki's got a question. There is a client that has 2 shops under one ABN. One shop has a decline of 90%. The other shop does not have a decline. Does the client need to group the figures from both shops to apply for the grant, or can he just apply with a one shop's figure?
That's a great question. I don't have a straightforward answer, but everything that I've read so far says that it needs to be that aggregated lodgement.
Yeah, I would suggest that on my reading, it's about the entity that has the decline rather than the businesses within there. Given it's what I
will say though is all over the New South Wales information, it says that if this does not meet your circumstances specifically, still apply, give us the reasons why, and we'll contact you effectively. So if there is, if you are greatly impacted and you can show that that business potentially was a bigger portion of the business, we can look at supplying a letter with the appropriate evidence and it will be considered. However, it will be a manual process and you won't get the money as quick if you do end up being eligible.
Yeah, okay, good. There's a question on here with information from Luke. G'day, Luke. With information being drip fed by the government, what is the best way to stay up to date with grants and changes that may impact on business?
Oh, that's easy. Subscribe to our newsletters. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on LinkedIn. We'll keep you up to date.
We should have almost set that one up. And there's one more question, which is another pertinent question, is will a recording of this be available? Yes, it will. We'll have a recording of this webinar available on our website. It should be later this afternoon, but if you registered, you will get a emailed copy as well. There's a few other concessions and so forth that the New South Wales government has advised, Rebecca. Payroll tax, I understand there's some deferrals there.
Yeah, just remembering this is a deferral, not a total wipe off of the liability. But if you're having cash flow issues, you're able to divert your annual reconciliation, July and August payments until the end of the beginning of October.
Okay.
And if
anything else on payroll tax?
Yeah, if you're still stuck at that point, you can go into an interest-free repayment plan for payroll tax for up to 12 months. And with businesses that have got Australian wages up to $10 million and a revenue decline of 30%, you can apply for a 25% reduction in the current year's payroll tax. So that's from July's lodgements onwards. They haven't supplied all the details on how we apply for that yet. They're not going to do that until the end of August.
Okay. I understand there's also some relief around land tax.
Yes, so that's quite specific to residential landlords and land tax relief. And any land tax relief that you receive as a landlord or any reductions that you receive needs to be passed on in full to your tenants, and your tenant needs to be eligible as well. So the tenants need to have lost at least 25% of their revenue or more, and then you can apply for a reduction. So it's either a $1,500 grant or 100% of land tax, and you have to pass that money back onto your tenant. You don't get to keep it as a landlord.
Yep. Okay, so if the tenants lost 25% of their income, we get a reduced land tax, which just means we don't recover as much from them with their land tax payments. Okay. I know there were some rules with the original sort of national lockdown around not allowing commercial landlords to kick their tenants out or anything like that. Have they put something else in place similar to that?
Yeah, they're back on again, and no one's allowed to be evicted under those circumstances unless they are have gone to mediation first.
Okay, good. And what about Commonwealth sort of business tax relief or anything like that? Any deferrals from the ATO or anything?
That's actually a big difference between this and the JobKeeper. So JobKeeper was a taxable payment. All these grants that we're talking about at this point, these New South Wales focused ones, are all going to be tax-free. So if you receive any of this money, you don't have to pay any tax.
Even the JobSaver?
At this stage, apparently.
Okay, good. We've got another couple of questions for you, Rebecca. Jeff Flood, I am a sole trader and my invoices usually are paid 3 to 4 weeks after invoicing. Therefore, my decline has 3 to 4 week lag. Are there any considerations when applying the initial grant? That'll depend, I imagine, with how you registered for GST purposes.
That's right. It's going to totally come down to whether or not you're on a cash or accruals basis. If that lag is existing, then you probably won't be eligible. And you're on a cash basis, you probably won't be eligible until we get to the next round.
Yeah. And there is a question, will bookkeeping software follow to support these payments? Are these grants seen as income? So the first part of that, will bookkeeping software be updated? I don't think we quite know the answer to that yet.
Obviously. No, we do. It has already. Yes. So Xero has, if you're using Xero, I'm not sure about the others at the moment, but Xero has already been updated. And there is an additional report under reports, then taxes for this grant that will calculate it out for you and give you all the information that you need.
Good work, Xero.
Yeah.
And are these grants shown as income?
Not for tax purposes.
Not for tax purposes. Look, that's covered off on everything we know about the latest support from the state government, New South Wales state government, and from the federal government. Rebecca, is there any sort of parting comments or suggestions that you would have for people?
If you get stuck, reach out to us, preferably by email with as much information as possible. So if we do need to do some research, we can do that before coming back to you. But we are here to support you through this as much as possible.
Yeah, of course. Reach out, best, as Rebecca said, on email. Probably best to just go direct to sydney@businessdepot.com.au. As always, if there's anything you're not sure of, send us through an email and we'll try and get back to you as quick as we can. Of course, we will keep our blog updated all the time with any new announcements, any changes to amounts and dates and those types of things. If you just go on to businessdepot.com.au, go into the blog, you'll see, I think it's the second from the top, the New South Wales support. So maybe earmark that so that you can keep going back to it with any changes. The recording will be available, it'll be emailed out to those that have registered. Otherwise, if you get lost, it'll be on the website as well under the blog for you to refer back on anything that you may need to know. I hope that's been of value for you guys. And as we said, if ever you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you very much.